is Falan. We are going to do a storytelling series this week, and I wanted to kick this off with the first book, which is a classic, and it is a great classic. It's North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. So this book is one of my favorites, and it talks about the prejudice and preconceived ideas that we can have when we go to a completely different place. So it even romanticizes our past a little bit. So we all can probably relate to that a little bit. So the part I would like to read takes place in an industrial town in England, and all the workers are working in cotton mills. And they've been on strike, and the mill owners the mill owner that we're going to discuss is John Thornton. And there's a few other characters that we're going to talk about, just so you are aware of who they are. Miss Thornton, which is John Thornton's mother. Fanny is his sister, and Margaret Hale is the main character, one of the main characters. So the workers have been on strike for a while, and John Thornton is going to be bringing in workers from Ireland to try and meet some of his deadlines. And so some of the workers have discovered that the replacement laborers are going to be taking over their jobs, and so obviously they're upset. And so we're just going to read that part in the story. They're at the gates. Call John, Fanny. Call him in from the mill. They're at the gates. They'll batter them in. Call John, I say. And simultaneously the gathering tramp, to which she had been listening instead of heeding Margaret's words, was heard just outside the wall. And an increasing din of angry voices raged behind the wooden barrier, which shook as if the unseen maddened crowd had battering rams of their bodies, and retreated a short space only to come with more united, steady impetus against it, till their great beats made the strong gates quiver like reeds before the wind. The women gathered round the windows, fascinated to look at the scene which terrified them. Miss Thornton, the women servants, Margaret, all were there. Fanny had returned screaming upstairs as if pursued at every step, and had thrown herself in hysterical sobs on the sofa. Miss Thornton watched for her son, who was still in the mill. He came out. He looked up at them, the pale cluster of faces, and smiled good courage to them, before he locked the factory door. Then he called to one of the women to come down and undo his own door, which Fanny had fastened behind her in her mad flight. Miss Thornton herself went, and the sound of his well-known and commanding voice seemed to have been like the taste of blood to the infuriated multitudes outside. Hitherto they had been voiceless, wordless, needing all their breath for their hard, laboring efforts to break down the gates. But now, hearing him speak inside, they set up such a fierce, unearthly groan that even Miss Thornton, as white with fear as she preceded him into the room. He came in a little flushed, but his eyes gleaming as an answer to the trumpet call of danger, and with a proud look of defiance on his face that made him a noble, if not a handsome man. Margaret had always dreaded lest her courage should fail her in any emergency, and she should be proved to be what she dreaded lest she was, a coward. But now, in this real great time of reasonable fear and nearness of terror, she forgot herself and felt only an intense sympathy, intense painfulness in the interests of the moment. I'm going to skip a little bit of dialogue and we can pick up here. Mr. Thornton, said Margaret, shaking all over with her passion, go down this instant if you are not a coward. Go down and face them like a man. Save these poor strangers whom you have decoyed here. Speak to your workmen as if they were human beings. Speak to them kindly. Don't let the soldiers come in and cut down poor creatures who have been driven mad. I see one there who is. If you have any courage or noble quality in you, go out and speak to them, man to man. He turned and looked at her while she spoke. A dark cloud came over his face while he listened. He set his teeth as he heard her words. I will go. Perhaps I may ask you to accompany me downstairs and bar the door behind me. My mother and sister will need that protection. Oh, Mr. Thornton, I don't know. I may be wrong. But he was gone. He was downstairs in the hall. He had unbarred the front door. All she could do was to follow him quickly and fasten it behind him, and clamber up the stairs again with a sick heart and a dizzy head. Again she took her place by the farthest window. He was on the steps below. She saw that by the direction of 1,000 angry eyes, but she could neither see nor hear anything save the savage satisfaction of the rolling, angry murmur. She threw the window wide open. Many in the crowd were mere boys, cruel and thoughtless. Cruel because they were thoughtless. Some were men, gaunt as wolves and mad for prey. She knew how it was. They were like Boucher, with starving children at home, relying on ultimate success in their efforts to get higher wages, and enraged beyond measure at discovering that Irishmen were to be brought in to rob their little ones of their bread. Margaret knew it all. She read it in Boucher's face, forlornly desperate and livid with rage. If Mr. Thornton would but say something to them, let them hear his voice only. It seemed as if it would be better than his wild beating and raging against the stony silence that vouchsafed them no word, even of anger or reproach. But perhaps he was speaking now. There was a momentary hush of their noise, inarticulate as that of a troop of animals. She tore her bonnet off and bent forward to hear. She could only see, for if Mr. Thornton had indeed made the attempt to speak, the momentary instinct to listen to him was past and gone, and people were raging worse than ever. He stood with his arms folded, still as a statue, his face pale with repressed excitement. They were trying to intimidate him, to make him flinch, even was urging the other on to some immediate act of personal violence. Margaret felt intuitively that in an instant all would be an uproar. The first touch would cause an explosion, in which among such hundreds of infuriated men and reckless boys, even Mr. Thornton's life would be unsafe. And in another instant, the stormy passion would have passed their bounds and swept away all barriers of reason or apprehension of consequence.